Rosalind, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
This is a really interesting topic, and I think it's one that many of our listeners, especially parents, struggle with as it relates to the world of our boys and understanding that. And you have been intimately involved in really from a research standpoint, but then also just social observation. Having a chance to read your book has just been really eye-opening. I think as a parent of 3 little boys that are soon to be in high school, those teen years, I want to start with kind of asking, you talk about this in your book, this act like a man box, and what that kind of helps define our boys as they are moving into the teen years. Tell us about that.
Yeah, sure. And, first and foremost, I think the most important thing is that even though I've been teaching young people for a long time, I wrote Masterminds with the help of boys. I would never have written it without having boys help me through every part of this. So please know, if you're watching this, that this is not a woman thinking that she knew how to talk about boys. I needed boys to help me so that if I had any chance of the information that I would share with parents or with men who wanted to read about this, just for themselves, not just as fathers or brothers or uncles, that we did this collaboratively with a group of middle school and high school boys and me.
How many boys did you interview in this process?
We had about 160. We interviewed them, but they were also editors. I mean, we had them read all of the advice that I was writing, and they would tell me when I was wrong. And we also had men in their 20s who were helping me. So it was truly a collaboration. It wasn't just me interviewing them. It was them telling me what I needed to share with other people, or the things that we usually tell boys for advice, or the things that they hear from parents. How do they get that? Like, how do they hear it? Does it work for them?
Right.
So, in answer to your question about the Act Like a Man box, that we have very written and unwritten rules in our culture about how boys should act. And people have very strong feelings about this one way or the other, so that, we want boys, we worry about boys being told to become girls or things like that. And that's just so not the case. What we want is for boys to be strong, confident, courageous, take the right kinds of risks. And sometimes those kinds of risks are different from what we might perceive to be risks. So, being able to say to a friend, "You have betrayed me," I've got some kind of family problem that is really killing me and I don't know how to talk about it, or I want to be able to talk to my friend, but I don't want him to make fun of me. I actually want to be able to say, I need you to talk like as a friend, not just like messing around and joking around. That's what the Act Like a Man box is about, is the boys get so many rules about what they can and can't do to get respect from other people, meaning like people will say like they fit into the box. And so it's really important for boys to be multifaceted people and for other people to allow them to be that way. So that's what the Act Like a Man box is, because I'll just give a really concrete example of this. Is that taking a risk if you're inside the man box, right? Taking a risk actually is, sometimes we think like boys jump off of things or they do crazy things that are really risky, right? Because they're risky to their physical selves. But that's actually conforming to the Act Like a Man box, because doing things that are risky physically actually is not risky, right? And culturally as a boy. But if you do something like stand up to somebody and speak out about something they're doing that's unethical, or going after somebody, that actually, unfortunately, means that you're going against like the Act Like a Man box, which in some ways is so ironic, because people want boys to be honorable, and sometimes that Act Like a Man box convinces boys to not act honorably even if they really want to.
It's almost like you have the Act Like a Boy box and the Act Like a Man box, and the Act Like a Man box is the box that actually defines character, some of these traits that are wholesome and right, and you're standing up and doing the hard thing, right? Not the easy thing in a social setting. You go into this kind of percentages, like the 10%ers, the 75%ers. Does that contribute to the box?
Well, here's what I think, and the boys told me this, is that the more you want to conform to what other people expect of you as a guy, then the harder it is for you to come into your own as a man, right? So ironically, that's what the boys said to me, and it makes perfect sense. The more you're trying hard to fit into other people's expectations of what a man should be, and especially if that means like playing certain sports or not playing certain sports, or feeling passionate about things. Passion actually is a huge issue for boys. We can feel, boys, and I have 2 boys that are 12 and 14, they can overtly talk passionately about the NBA draft or the playoffs that are going on right now. And they can talk about it and they can be really passionate about it. But at the same time in our culture, but boys are not feeling comfortable talking about passionately the ways in which they want to change the world, the way they want to make the world a better place. Then they get teased for that. And that really strips boys from being the men that they want to become. They have the right to feel passionate about changing the world and making things better for people and doing things honorably. And where we're at right now is that you get to be passionate about the NBA playoffs. And I'm not taking away from how important that is to some boys, but you also have to be able to recognize they get to be passionate about other things that, even as a parent of 2 athletes, maybe are a little bit more important, right? So it's really important to think about these things so we give boys the freedom and flexibility to be the people that they want to be.
Yeah. And, I think I have to think or imagine that part of this is the pressure of the roles that they take on in these groups, these communities that are formed. And you talk about that in your book of just kind of these attributes, or maybe better defined as roles. Tell us a little bit about that. I mean, does that contribute to this problem that you're talking about?
Sure. Well, when I wrote the book, I was absolutely prepared for the boys. The boys got to do whatever they wanted. They really got to tell me, of course they did, what their social worlds were like. And so when I said to them, I felt like I had taught boys for a long time. Do you feel like you have roles in your groups? And I was ready to have them define it however they wanted. And the boys and I argued and discussed and debated for about 1.5 years to come up with the roles that they thought across the board, because the boys came from all different parts of the country and all different kinds of backgrounds, what was the most generalized patterns that they saw. And so not surprisingly, they saw somebody who had a lot of verbal ability, who was charismatic, who very much defined his power based on you're either with him or you're against him, meaning you couldn't disagree with him. And if you disagreed with him, then that gave him the right or ability to justify ridiculing you or dismissing you or taking away like sort of your rights in the group. And then there was a guy or 2 that backed him up. There was a guy called the entertainer who didn't like he would know when things were getting a little bit out of hand, when things were getting just over the edge of being too mean or too aggressive, and he would try and do something to sort of even it out, to make a self-deprecating comment. There was another role that we came up with called the fly, which is a guy who's constantly trying to be useful to the group, and he looks like he's trying too hard. So the boys oftentimes will use him, unfortunately. And then there's another person called the punching bag, which is the kid who within the group gets teased and ridiculed the most, but the boys in the group think of him as their brother, and they justify their behavior by saying like, well, he's one of us and nobody else can treat him that way, but we get to do whatever we want to him. So the boys called that, because they got to come up with all of the titles for these roles, the punching bag. And lots of what I think about the roles is that they're not constantly permanent. One kid could be a mastermind in his neighborhood and be a punching bag at school, or maybe you're a mastermind when you're in middle school and then circumstances change so that maybe you change roles when you get into high school. Things change, things happen. But what's most important is that these roles come forward, and they especially come forward when there's conflict amongst the boys or when there's an abuse of power. And that's when the roles really, really come forward. And the thing that's a problem about that is that lots of times boys don't know what to say, because they constantly will say to me, well, I just didn't want to say anything. I just wanted to wait. And lots of times what happens is boys wait until things are way over their heads, and then they get embarrassed that they didn't handle it, or they feel ashamed that things have gotten out of control, and then they don't say anything again. And so we get to these places when we find out that boys have done these unbelievably horrible things or participated, and we think, what in the world happened? It's these social dynamics that make it really difficult for the boys to recognize when they're in trouble and then come forward when they're in trouble.
Wow. I mean, I think it's phenomenal that you were able to get into the feelings of these boys. I mean, I think that's one of the biggest challenges that oftentimes in our teenage years, people, I mean, being a guy that went through that, it's like you shut down those emotions, you shut down those feelings, and it's almost like that's the adult world, and I really only want to share what I have to share. How did you get, I mean, this was like a social experience. How did you get them to open up and share?
Yeah, that was the big, like, could I do it? And, really think about this. Like, I was not going to get them in trouble. I'm not really, I have strong opinions about things, but I don't judge. I'm not going to judge them as like, you're horrible. I'm not going to shame them. I've been with guys and I genuinely think most of them are pretty funny. Like, I have a very high tolerance for what's funny. I'm really direct in the way that I speak, and I know that that's what boys respond to. And I didn't sit down with them and say to the boys, okay, boys, now you have to tell me everything that's going on in your world. You have to tell me your deepest, darkest secrets, and we're all going to sit around in a circle and we're going to talk about that. I don't want to do that. And I certainly think that most boys don't want to do that. And they have to trust you. You have to earn their trust if they're going to tell you in any way what's going on. So we worked at it. I had to earn their trust, and it took a while. And we worked at it, and we truly, and I also argued with them a lot. Boys like to have respectful arguments with people. They like to debate, and I like it too. So, there were boys that I disagreed with constantly, and those were boys that I had the best relationships with. And I think bottom line also is that I believe, and I think the boys could tell that I think that what they're going through is important, and that it's worth sharing, and that people aren't listening to them, or they're stereotyping them or dismissing them. And I think that boys, boys have the right to be seen as complex individuals, and for people to stop dismissing them as being so stupid or simple, or, all they care about is sex. And, for teenage boys, it's incredibly disrespectful and dismissive to boys to say, like, all you have are your hormones, and you're just hormone crazed. They have hormones. They do. So do girls, by the way. But boys have complex emotional feelings about things, and they're not just about their hormones. And I think it's important to see that. And when boys see that in you, they will tell you what's going on.
Yeah. Well, hopefully as parents that are listening, you just took a bunch of notes, because I think what you were just laying out there is some really great advice because I mean, the natural question is, as parents, is like, how do we break through that emotional barrier? How do we get past the point where they trust us to share those feelings? Because I think a lot of stuff that happens in the high school years could be potentially mitigated if there was open communication. So just real quick, a recap for parents. How do they break through this barrier with their children or their boys?
Well, I think for the most part, there's a couple things I would say. Okay. One is when you're worried about your child, and again, I go through this myself with my boys. I have one that's very closed, and I just recently had to say to him, I don't exactly know what's going on in your life, and you have a right to privacy, which I do believe kids have the right to privacy. And even if you don't believe that as an adult, your kids will try very hard to create a private life. And the more you try and deny that privacy, the more they're going to try and create it. So they have the right, I believe that they do. And I, say to students and to my own children, you have the right to a private life. It's hard for me to understand what's going on with you when you won't share stuff with me, but I'm not going to sit here and like look at you with these weird expectant eyes waiting for you to talk to me. You just need to know that I'm worried, I'm concerned, and I'm ready to talk when you're ready, and then walk away. Like, one of the most important things for boys is strategically knowing when to walk away. You don't wait there for them to start, spilling their guts. The second thing that I would say is that and the boys said this, and I talk about this in masterminds, is that when you see them at the end of the day, that you do not start asking them a million questions about their day. Even if you think it's well-intentioned, even if it is well-intentioned, asking them, like, how was practice? How was this class? Well, how are your friends? How is all the questions that lots of times moms, unfortunately, for the most part, ask their sons. stops the boys from actually wanting to talk to you because it's overwhelming. When you come home after practice or after school, you just want to decompress. You don't want to, for the most part, you don't want to vomit out all the information that just happened to you.
Yes.
And so I just think the boys that I worked with just wanted the parents, their fathers and mothers, to see it from their perspective, which was that when you're coming home from a long day of work, the last thing you want is for somebody to be waiting there asking you 25 questions about your day. You just want to sit, probably grab a beer. In my case, you want a glass of bourbon, and you want to sit and you just want to decompress. Yeah. The boys wanted they wanted the parents to see it that way. So when you see your kid at the end of the day, all I would like for you to do as a parent is just somehow communicate affection, that you're glad that they're there in the car with you or in the house. You're just glad that they're there, and just leave it. Right? Just be like, hey, like, good to see you. And then be quiet. And then that actually tends to have boys come much, much faster and talk to you much more than them being interrogated when you see them.
You know, this isn't too far from the world of husbands and wives, right? I mean, the guys usually have the nothing box. It's like, just leave us alone. We need to decompress here after a long day of work. And the wife's like, tell me how I mean, there's some of that same situations that, I see play out often.
Absolutely.
I guess one of the questions that comes to mind when it comes to boys, there seems to be, and I don't want to generalize here, but there seems to be, and since you've written the book on both the girls and boys, I think you can really speak to this, but there seems to be more of a mentality of aggressive girls and more passive boys when it comes to this whole dynamic of high school and the way that dating's taking place and just, the culture that we're in. Would you say that's true? And why? Why is that?
I think we have such a hard time seeing girls and boys for who they are. We so often dismiss or superficialize or simplify what's going on. Now, there are some things that are simple. Like, as a parent, there are the values that you hold. For example, for me, it's that my children have to treat other people with dignity, with worth. Now, are my children going to make mistakes about that? Yes. I was just talking to my older child about that yesterday, about he clearly had not treated somebody the way that I would hope that he would. The thing is, you always get a chance to make it better. You always have a chance to make it right. And so talking about going back into that relationship, and I don't use the words, for example, I don't ever say to my children or as teacher, I don't say be nice, be kind, because I think that kids, and especially boys, don't like those words. I don't like those words. What I said to my kid, for example, was, I need you to be decent to this person, right? That's my requirement, is you must be decent. Now, you talk to me about what I think decent means. And so it doesn't mean you have to be like overly nice. It means that you just can't be horrible. And so, like, what does that mean? It was a situation where, and I bet a lot of parents can relate to this, where my kid was being really competitive. Another child was not being as competitive, and my kid was getting angry about it. And that, in his mind, justified him being really horrible to another kid. Well, that's not cool. Like, people have different levels of intensity, but it doesn't justify you going after somebody. So you need to be decent. Right. And so what's important is, when we talk about boys and girls, is that there has been this reputation that girls have been really mean and nasty. And the way we say it is girls are, if somebody says, like, oh, do you have kids? And the person says, yeah, I have 2 daughters. And they're like, oh, you're going to be dealing with all these mean girl, horrible stuff. And then what we say about boys is they're so simple, right? They're easy. Girls are hard, boys are easy. And boys are not simple. What they do is they're very good at hiding what's going on in their lives. Wow. Yeah. And so for girls, first of all, if you're raising daughters, don't let people say girls are horrible, because girls are not horrible. Girls are not, as a group of people, always going to be backstabbing, nasty, betraying people. That's not what they are. And we as adults have a responsibility to say, girls, you're going to get into conflict. Things are going to be hard. Gossip happens. People can do things around your back, behind your back. But that's not what you deserve, and that's not what you should expect from relationships that you have with girls. As a girl, you should expect and demand to have strong relationships with girls. And conflict is a part of that, but you really can have strong relationships. And on the other side, for boys, to say to them, things don't have to, I understand, things can be complex. You can have, good friendships with your tight group of friends, and within those friendships can be really difficult problems. And I get that. And you don't, and people, the other thing is people say is, well, boys just fight it out and it's over. Well, not exactly. Boys, lots of times in my experience, have friendships that they want to say something and they just can't get it out because they don't think it's worthwhile.
Right.
And they have a friend who like ridicules them constantly. What are you supposed to do? Fight, like step up to your friend and fight? Is that the only choice we're going to give boys is say nothing or to fight? Mm-hmm. They've got to have the right to do something in between that actually has some kind of credibility between the boys. And that's what I do. And that's what I teach. And that's what I listen to boys. And we work together. To be able to do that with each other.
That's super helpful, and I want to set up the scenario because I think, well, let me put it in a storyline. So a parent, they have a teenage boy, and he's in a relationship, and they have been monitoring, unbeknownst to him, the text messages between him and this girl, and it's been one of those things where it's been surprising what the text is, and especially the text from her to him, very forward in terms of where we want to go with this relationship. And they've been in this quandary, like they have this information now that is basically alarming, and yet, their son isn't being completely honest with the situation. Two questions in this scenario. One is, what drives boys to lie? Kind of go underground with this stuff, and then what would you say to this parent in terms of how do you handle that situation when you have the knowledge but you can't reveal necessarily what's going on here in terms of helping them process the emotions and the feelings behind it?
Well, let me see if I get this right. So, but can you say the two questions again, please?
Yeah. So there's basically the scenario of the boy not being completely honest with the situation.
He has not been honest.
No, he hasn't been honest. And they've been probing, but not coming out and saying, hey, we've been monitoring your text message activity, right? And then there's the side of it where, as a parent, you're saying, I need to do something, but I can't reveal my source, and I can't just come out and call them out. Or maybe you would say, yes, you do need to do that. I guess looking for kind of two sides of the equation.
Well, first of all, and again, not exactly in this situation, but I had a similar conversation with one of my boys last night. was I had, and you have to say these things like 25 times, right? It's not like you say it one time, you say it 25 times. So what I say to my kids is, yes, you have a right to privacy. Like I said before, you have a right to privacy, but I also have the right to check when I want about what's going on in your, on your phone or on your social media. Like I have the right. I don't want to be tracking you. Mm-hmm. I have no intention of like constantly doing reconnaissance and spying on you. But I do have the right when I think it's necessary to be able to go look, right? So you use that as like a blanket statement, and they'll forget about it, and then they'll forget, and then you'll have to remind them, and you'll remind them again. And they'll get mad and they will disagree and you'll say, yes, I know, but I want you to have a private life and I reserve the right to check when I am concerned or when I think there's cause, but I'm not going to do that very often because I think that, this is a relationship that goes both ways. So that's the first thing I think overall. The second thing is that if you do get information that would then reveal you haven't said that, say you haven't said that and you find out information about what's going on with your kid, I think that what you can do is there's a couple different things. One is that there are ways to be able, like if the boy is getting information from, if he got a picture from a girl that's sexually aggressive, one of the things I don't want parents to do is to think in their minds, and excuse my language, but to think in their minds. The polite way of saying it that parents say is that that the girl is an instigator. She's instigating things, and what that really, really means is they think that the girl is sexually promiscuous, has sexual problems, is way too aggressive. And then they start putting those bad words in your mind. Those words start coming in. And you have to remember that these girls are 13, 14, and 15 years old. So yes, they're teenagers, but they're also children. And I want us to really not be ever using nasty words towards children. And that's a really important, because we need to remember to become and always maintain being parents and adults in these situations. Yeah. So then what you do is you sit down with your son and say, okay, and you can do it two ways. I've gotten information that was sent to you and that you participated in that is sort of against the way that I want you, and we've talked about, I hope parents have, that are really in violation or against the way that this family wants to use and has decided to use social media and to use technology. And your kid might say, how'd you find out, right? Mm-hmm. You can say, look, there was some information was presented to me. If you want to talk about denying it, that's one thing. But the reality is that we can't get away from that. You are getting stuff, and I want you to be able to respond to it. I know it's embarrassing to talk to your parent, but it's important to me. And here are the reasons why. Mm-hmm. Here's also, because this is a very complicated issue. I would not talk about going to jail. I would not talk about if you receive a picture, you're going to become on the sexual predator list. Please don't talk like that, because for kids my experience is it doesn't work. It also, for the most part, is inaccurate. And it's just not, we want to take this from an educational and values point of view, and then couple that with rules and discipline, right? Instead of just going right to punitive, you're going to end up in jail on some list. So when we talk about this, what I think is really important, especially for dads, is to sit down with their sons and say, you know what, sometimes girls in high school really are going to present themselves in sexual ways. And you know what, they're not bad girls. They're not, there's lots of reasons why girls will do this. And there's lots of reasons why you would want to get these pictures, or you want to get these texts. I get that. But here's why I think it's a problem, and here's why I want to talk to you about it. And that's where you put your values in, so that he sees it as part of you being his dad and being in relationship with him. Mm-hmm. That's why kids aren't going to do something. It's because they're in relationship with people that they respect, who have told them what the rules are. So that is what's going to stop them from participating in these things.
And I think you're right. I mean, it's the role of the parent so often gets positioned as an adversary versus an advocate. And I think it's coming alongside your child and saying, I'm an advocate for you. I want the best for you. And here's what I see as harming your future, versus accusatory, I got dirt on you. And, you're going to, like you said, all the extreme language that so often parents can kind of, in the emotional wake of this, go off the deep end. So that's...
And I mean, I just dealt with this with a high school girl, and she had sent some pictures to a boy, and the mother had called her mother, and because the boy had talked to his mother about it, and it was all this big brouhaha. So the mother of the boy calls the mom of the girl and is really nasty about why, called the girl names, accused the girl of doing all sorts of things. Her son was completely innocent, all that stuff. That boy, just like most of the time, right afterwards, goes and calls the girl and says, oh my gosh, I can't believe my mom found out. I'm so sorry. Oh my gosh. Right. And those kids actually became closer as a result of that conversation. Meanwhile, the mother of the boy thinks that this girl is like a skank and that her son is never going to talk to this girl again. What's going to happen is the son is never going to talk to the mom about anything again. So it's really important that we manage ourselves, because our kids won't talk to us if we freak out.
Right. Absolutely. Another question, and we're almost done here, but when it comes to the parent who knows that their child's being bullied, and whether it's intel that they've received or just the conversations they've had with their child, what would you say to them? Because I think this is a real issue that a lot of times parents don't know how to deal with.
Well, here's the thing, especially for parents of boys, this is true for girls too, but even with little kids, I want us to think about this in terms of philosophically how we approach these issues. When our son falls down in the playground when he's 5 years old, where there's sort of these two schools of camp, which is that we let the boys cry, and because we need, boys get to cry, or we say, get up, boys don't cry. And what I would like for people to do, imagine how the lesson that boys would learn and do learn, because there are people who do this, that when he hurts himself, that the parent goes over, the adult that cares for him, and says, that, your knee's bloody. That's tough. That looks like it hurts. Oh my gosh. I'm so sorry. That looks like it hurts. Let's get you a Band-Aid, right? Let's clean you up. Let's get you a Band-Aid. Are you good? Can you stand up? Can you keep going? Yeah. Excellent. That's amazing. That's so strong. Good for you. So you do both. You give them the affirmation that the experience that they went through was painful, And yet you also tell them, and you're strong enough to get through it and get up and keep going. That's the kind of message that parents should be giving, no matter who, if it's boy or girl. But I want us to think about it in terms of boys, because we so often just say to them, keep going, keep going, keep going. Inside, and then they don't talk to us and they're having a problem. So when they're being, what I would say to a kid is, when they're, in general, what I would say to a child is, you know what, sometimes kids get into conflicts and sometimes kids can be mean. It doesn't mean they're always mean. But I just want you to know that if that's happening, if you feel like somebody is doing that, and you can ask your kid if they're really young, like, what does it mean to, what do you think that feels like when somebody's being mean? Can you describe it? So that when they're feeling it in real life, then they have a recollection of, oh yeah, that's what I told my mom, or that's what I told my dad, right? It feels like I'm getting cut, or it feels like I'm really like, oh, like I want to explode, right? So you have that memory, you're planting that memory for them. Yeah. And then you say, these kinds of things happen. So when that happens, you don't have to, if it keeps happening, or you feel like you're worried, this is for little kids, you can't go to the playground, or you're worried about going to lunch, and you feel like it's what you're thinking about all the time, that's when you need to talk to an adult about it. But let's think about who the adult is who's like really smart enough to be able to talk to, right? Let's be really strategic about who we talk to. And that's for little kids, but basically the same theme goes as the kids get older, so that as they're in middle school and high school, you say, yeah, messed up stuff happens. It totally does. Mm-hmm. And if that happens, you don't have to do, I can understand why if you want to handle things on your own. But at a certain point, and let's talk about it, when would be the time that you would talk to somebody? And I get that all adults are not great at this. Some adults are terrible at this. So let's think about who the adult is who's smart enough for you to go talk to. And then use that as a way of skill building for your child, so they don't feel, they're not making these decisions when they're feeling so anxious. And then when your child is actually in the moment, when they come to you, I really think that kids, for the most part, will say things really general, like, Dad, the kids were bothering me. And you're like, okay, whatever. And you want your kid to be strong and tough. So you're like, whatever, just deal with it. Well, kids are talking a lot in generalities because they're watching to see what you're going to say. So what I would do is I would say, they're bothering you, or they're teasing you. All right, they're messing around with you. Well, what does that mean? Can you describe for me a little bit more what that means, so I have a better understanding of what you're dealing with? Then you get a better picture. And then if your kid says something to you about it's a problem, if he's talking to you, he thinks it's a problem. So please don't say, just ignore it, because your kid's probably been ignoring it for a long time, and they're coming and talking to you because they can't ignore it anymore. So you say, I'm really sorry this happened to you. Thanks for telling me. Like, that was amazing that you told me. And let's think this through. Let's think through how you can manage this so you feel better about it. So you're taking a very anxious time, and you're creating a way for the child to process their emotions and not be overrun by their emotions, not be ashamed of their emotions, so they can go from emotions to thinking through the situation clearly. Yeah.
Super helpful. I think so much of this is stuff that, unfortunately, as parents, we don't get this handbook handed to us and say, chapter on bullying, here's what you need to do, right? But there is a book that has been written with many of these topics that we've covered today, Masterminds and Wingman, and I can't say enough about the work that you've done, and really a beacon of hope, I think, for many parents, because when you're in the thick of it, it feels overwhelming. It feels like I don't know where to turn to get help, and you've done the hard work to have boys open up and share, which I think, all of us parents appreciate that. So thank you on behalf of so many, and we wish you the best in future endeavors.
Yes, thank you.
All right.